This is probably completely out of sync with our topic for today. What I'm going to talk about is one particular incident at a particular point in time, that is the Battle of Evangelica, and talk about it in terms of papal politics. Papal politics on the eve of the sack of Rome. So 10 years on from 1517, 1527. But hopefully, as I give you some details, we'll be able to see that the Pope's attitude to the East was very similar to his attitude to the West and what was going on in Northern Europe. So that's the idea. Bear with me if it doesn't quite work. There'll be time for discussion afterwards when you can keep this paper into some sort of shape. On the 18th of February 1527, King Sigismund I of Poland wrote from Krakow to Pope Clement VII, seen here, informing him of a victory that his troops had recently won over an invading army of Crimean Tartars. Surprisingly well informed of current affairs in Italy, the Polish king hoped that the news of the Polish success would afford the Pope some solace, and I quote, amid the recent troubles in the Christian world and the most shameful discord and tumults of the Christian princes. A month later, the king's letter had arrived in Rome and was read out in consistory by Cardinal Chiesi. Later the same day, Francesco Sperano, Bishop of San Leone, an erstwhile poet, soldier, and occasional spy, delivered an oration celebrating the Polish victory. This speech was delivered before an audience that was cognizant of contemporary events. As the details may no longer be familiar for this audience, a brief outline of the historical circumstances which prompted the oration will be given before close analysis of the text. Italy on the eve of the sack of Rome. For almost a century, the kings of France and Spain had argued over claims to territories at two ends of the Italian peninsula, Naples and Milan. In the early years of the 16th century, the Spanish had virtually annexed both territories. The French, however, never gave up hope of acquiring Milan. By the 1520s, this had turned into a personal squabble between King Francis I of France and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Thank you very much. Seen here, Francis and Charles V. The Battle of Pavia and the Treaty of Madrid. In mid-October 1524, King Francis I personally led the French army over the Alps into Lombardy and advanced on Milan at the head of a force numbering more than 30,000. As the bulk of the imperial army was in eastern Lombardy, and the city, recently decimated by plague, was in no position to offer any serious resistance, Milan promptly fell. Having entered the city and installed the French governor, Francis then turned his attention to Pavia, down the road, garrisoned by the Spanish general Antonio de Lea. Flushed with this initial success and encouraged by a secret treaty with the papacy, at this point Francis diverted a sizable contingent of his army under James Stuart, Duke of Albany, on a foolhardy expedition against Naples, even though the imperial army was growing in force daily. Moreover, Pavia managed to withstand the long winter siege, thus allowing the imperial army to march west in late January to relieve the city. Francis had encamped the majority of his forces in the great walled park of Mirabello outside the city walls, placing them between De Lega's garrison and the approaching relief army, which now included a formidable contingent of German landslings. For 3 weeks, the front stagnated. On the 21st of February, the imperial commanders, running low on supplies and mistakenly believing that the French forces were more numerous than their own, decided to launch an attack on Mirabello in order to save face and dishearten the French sufficiently to ensure a safe withdrawal. In a brilliant and daring night manoeuvre, on the 23rd of February, the Imperial Relief Army outflanked the French line, and at dawn the following day, Imperial engineers breached the walls in the city, breached the walls of the town of Mirabello, allowing the Imperial troops to enter the park. Now the next part. While Francis called his main body to arms, the garrison sorted from Pavia, seizing the southern end of the park and effectively cutting the French troops off in the park from their compatriots in the east and west of the city. In the ensuing 4-hour battle, the French heavy cavalry masked its own artillery by a rapid advance and was surrounded and cut down by the Landsmiths and the massed Spanish riflemen. Meanwhile, a protracted infantry engagement eventually caused the rout of the Swiss and the French infantry. Although the king fought bravely, his men-at-arms were individually butchered around him or taken prisoner, and Francis himself was finally taken captive. The French forces had been utterly defeated. Soon afterwards, Francis learned that the Duke of Albany had lost the larger part of his army to attrition and desertion, and had returned to France without ever reaching Naples. Routed from Milan, the broken remnants of the French forces retreated back across the Alps, eventually reaching Lyon in March 1525. The Duchy of Milan now passed permanently under the control of Charles V and would become the linchpin of the Habsburg Empire in Europe. Having first supported the imperial cause, on the eve of the Battle of Pavia, Pope Clement VII wavered and switched his allegiance to France. The timing could not have been worse, and left the papacy in a position of weakness from which it would take some considerable time to recover. Francis was now a prisoner, was taken to Spain, and where he was securely lodged in Madrid. Charles V pressed for a one-sided peace that Francis could hardly refuse. On the 14th of January 1526, Charles and Francis agreed to the Treaty of Madrid, by which the king formally renounced all his claims in Italy, Flanders and Artois, surrendered Burgundy to Charles, agreed to send 2 of his sons to be hostages at the Spanish court, and promised to marry Charles' sister Eleanor and restore the renegade Duke of Bourbon the territories that had been seized from him. The Treaty of Madrid freed Francis to return to his kingdom in March, but he had no intention of keeping his pledge, while the indecisive Pope, convinced that the Emperor's growing power was a threat to his own position in Italy, sent envoys to Francis and King Henry VIII of England, suggesting an alliance against Charles. On the 22nd of May, with Clement VII's blessing, Francis proclaimed that he would not be bound by the Treaty of Madrid because he'd been forced to sign it under duress. The anti-Habsburg League of Cognac was formed between France, Venice and Pope Clement VII with the goal of undoing the work of Pavia. However, the League's military operations throughout 1526 were lackluster and ineffective. As Clement had switched his allegiance and was now openly hostile to Spain and the Empire, the papacy was in an extremely vulnerable position. To make matters worse, although the imperial army had crushed the French and was victorious, the soldiers' pay was in arrears. In spring 1527, the 34,000 imperial troops mutinied and forced their commanders to lead them towards Rome to demand payment directly from the Pope. There was little that Clement could do other than watch helplessly as the imperial army, its ranks swelled by deserters from the League's own forces, freebooters, and importantly, the Landsmith, moved towards Rome, looting and pillaging en route. Next slide, please. And here we have an image of the Landsknecht in their flamboyant uniforms in a contemporary woodcut by Hugo Berkmayer. Okay, so much for Italy. Pope, 1527, has just lost the Battle of Pavia. He switched allegiances. He's no longer staying in Spain. Mutinying the Spanish force is coming down from the north to Rome. Let's turn our attention to Eastern Europe. Poland, Lithuania, and the Crimea. The situation in Eastern Europe was equally chaotic. Although Sigismund's succession to the throne of Poland on the 20th of October 1506 is often seen as heralding the flowering of the arts in Poland, the border situation was anything but flourishing. In March 1526, contemporaneously, the Turkish forces were already mustering along the Hungarian border. At the Battle of Mohacs on the 29th of August 1526, the Hungarian forces were defeated. Moreover, Sigismund's nephew, Louis, King of Hungary, had died in the battle. In the wake of this defeat, all Hungarian resistance to the Turks collapsed. A few days later, the Turks entered Buna and pillaged the castle and its surroundings, but retreated soon afterwards. Yet, to all intents and purposes, the Battle of Mohacs meant the end of the independent Kingdom of Hungary and the preeminence of Ottoman power in Eastern Europe. Sigismund, who had not renewed a treaty of peace with Turkey and had indeed sent a corps of Polish auxiliary troops to the assistance of his nephew, was thus left in a precarious situation. So much for the southern border. The situation was equally explosive to the east. Although the Grand Duchy of Lithuania passed to the Polish crown with the ascendancy of the Jagiellon kings in 1385, the border situation was volatile due to the presence on the Eurasian steppe of the Mongol Tatars. Seen as the natural heirs of the barbarian Scythians of antiquity, and associated in European thought at least with the devil's minions by the false etymology that derived their name from Tartarus, the frozen regions of hell, the Tartar raiding parties were a constant source of anxiety. The slave trade was essential to the economy of the Crimean Khanate and one of the major sources of income for the Tatar nobility. When harvesting the steppe, as it was called, raiding parties would capture and enslave the Christian peasants of any denomination living in the countryside. These raiding parties would then disappear just as quickly as they had arrived across the trackless steppe before the border castellans could marshal their wildly scattered levies. The 17th century traveller Guillaume de Vasseur, Sieur Beauplan, described the tactics of such raiding. Can I have the next slide? And this is reading number 1 on your handout. So this is a reading which describes an eyewitness event or an eyewitness report of the raiding parties by the Crimean Tatars known as harvesting the steppe. Upon entering hostile territory, the Tatar army split into 3 corps, 2 of which rode together in close parallel, while the third divided further to the left and right wings of 8,000 to 10,000 men each. After they advanced some 60 to 80 leagues into enemy territory, the wings separated to roam 10 or 12 leagues from each flank of the main corps. The wings swept across the enemy villages, placing 4 groups of guards around each village and burning great bonfires all night long for fear lest even one peasant should escape. They then sack and burn it, killing all those inhabitants who resist and taking away all those who yield, not only men, women and children at their mother's breast, but also livestock such as horses, oxen, sheep, cattle, goats, etc. When the wings returned to the main corps with their slaves and booty, 2 or more wings were dispatched in the same manner so as not to diminish the strength of the main corps. After harvesting the region to their satisfaction, they withdrew along a different route to escape interception and then reassembled at camp to divide up their spoils, a fifth or tenth of which accrued to the commander. This was the point at which they were most vulnerable to surprise attack by the Poles and Muscovites, who tried to separate them from their horses and liberate their prisoners. Although it is difficult to quantify the yield of the Crimean slave trade, it has been estimated that an average of 20,000 Poles were captured each year, with total losses for the period 1500 to 1644 numbering about 1 million. Indeed, it has been estimated that more than 3 million people, predominantly Ukrainians, but also Circassians, Russians, Belarusians and Poles, were captured and enslaved during the time of the Crimean Khanate. It must be pointed out here that the Crimean Khanate sells the slaves through Genoese traders, Italian traders, in the slave market that ranged across Europe and into Asia. So we have the Tartars, the Khans, working with the Genoese at this period to sell Christian slaves. Although King Sigmund sought peaceful coexistence with the Khanate of Crimea, he was unable completely to end border skirmishes as the Crimean Tartars continued to engage in frequent raids into the Danubian principalities, Poland, Lithuania and Muscovy. Indeed, it seems that the borderland to the southeast of Poland and Lithuania was in a state of semi-permanent warfare until the 18th century. To come back in time just a little. In 1475, the Crimean Tartars had been subjected to the Turks and had been brought under the suzerainty of the Sultans, who had only limited interest in restraining Tartar raids. On the contrary, they were encouraged to attack any state whose loyalty might be suspect, because, as the nominal subjects of the Crimean Khan, they could always be officially repudiated at Constantinople. In the last quarter of the 15th century, Tartar incursions depopulated huge swathes of Lithuania's Rus territories. In 1482, they sacked and burned much of Kiev. In 1505, they reached the outskirts of Vilnius. In 1490, they plunged deep into Poland itself to within a few miles of Lublin. A decade later, they threatened Warsaw. In 1513, the Moldovan princes also submitted to the suzerainty of the Sultan. Henceforth, the open steppes of Eurasia, a vast, ill-protected southeastern frontier of Poland, extending from Kiev to the Dnieper, and known as the Dziki Pola, the Wild Plains, was conterminous with Turkish territory and permanently insecure. In the summer of 1524, first the Turks and then the Tartars under Khan Sadet I of Gire invaded Volhynia, Podolia and Polish Ruthenia, which they pillaged as far as the rivers San and Bug. King Sigismund proclaimed a mass levy and went in person to Sandowiec, but these measures, as well as the military campaigns of Mikołaj I, did not redeem the losses caused by the Turco-Tatar invasion. This invasion, however, had important consequences. Sigismund henceforth resolved to set about improving the frontier defences by the organisation of a standing mercenary army of several thousand men under the direct command of the Polish hetman. Go to the next slide, please. Although the Tartars were prevented from undertaking any more serious expeditions in the country bordering Poland, they diverted their invasions to the Lithuanian-Ruthenian territory, which was not protected by a standing army. Due to the vigilance of the aged Lithuanian hetman, Konstanty Ostrogowski, as we see here, the Starostas, the Lord Marchers of the frontier, who had at their disposal only troops enrolled for the occasion, The almost Tartar invasions were kept in check. So we have this aged man here setting up a border patrol, troops that are not permanent, keeping the borders more or less safe. On the 28th of April, 1510, Ostrowski had defeated the Tartars in a great battle fought at Wisniewicz. 6 years later, 1516, another great Tartar raid ravaged the voivodeships of Prussia, Belsk and Lubiensk, carrying off no fewer than 50,000 captives to be sold as slaves at Kerch. In 1519, the Tartars wiped out a whole Polish army corps, 5,000 strong. On the 27th of January, 1527, finally we've come to our point, they penetrated almost to the walls of Krakow, but this time were overtaken and routed at the Battle of Orshanica. A dramatic moment when the prisoners rise against their captors forms the centerpiece of Sperolow's oration. This is reading number 2 in your handout. At that moment, you would have seen the prisoners themselves like men who had despaired of all help, revived, like spirited lions transformed from timid lambs, and rise up to avenge their own injuries, snatching the arms from the hands of the fallen enemy, and slaughtering those who had fallen, spearing the horses underneath, and completely aware of their changed condition, they vigorously used the same cruelty which they had feared from the enemy against those men, and became stained with the robbers' hated blood. The sudden reversal is compared in Sperolow's speech to the liberation to Abraham's liberation of his brother Lot and the victory over the king of Elam and his allies in Genesis 14, 14 to 20. The next slide, please. This is a detail from Raphael's loggia, contemporaneous with this is Raphael's loggia in the Vatican, painted around about 1560, and it shows Melchizedek and Abraham. Reading number 3. I seem to see Abraham himself, not at all confused in his mind by the news of fraternal slaughter, but inflamed by courageous love to inspire pious vengeance by his appearance and expression, immediately order his 318 men to strap on arms against thousands of enemies and get ready for battle. Now the renowned leader of a few men is making the journey and already pursuing the enemy, and now engaging in hand-to-hand combat. The Old Testament precedents are here, as so often in this period, used to show that the church blessed war. Sperolow also equates the Polish victory over the Crimean Tartars with Sigismund's vigorous defense of Poland against the Lutheran heresy. Unusual equation, if you think, reading number 4. Here is the fruit of your strength, with which you have driven away Germans who are rebellious to God, as far as possible from your borders. You have extinguished the fires of Luther wherever your arms are permitted to proceed. The reference here is to the Polish king's vigorous defense of Catholicism, and in particular his suppression of a Lutheran insurrection at Gdansk by his own army. The oration closes with a prayer for Sigismund, which echoes Melchizedek's blessing of Abraham. Reading number 5. Blessed be Abraham, Melchizedek said. Say you also, Holy Father, Clement VII. Blessed be Sigismund, the Most High God. Sigismund of the Most High God, who created heaven and earth. Blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered enemies into the hands of Abraham, and are now in your hands, most fortunate Sigismund, who, as you pursue the just causes of war, in accordance with your piety towards our Saviour Jesus Christ, let frequent victory befall you on earth, and let there not be lacking everlasting triumph in heaven. Thanks be to God. By making this comparison, Sperolow is able to include the whole of Christianity in the Polish victory, and allow the papacy to bathe in the reflected glory, albeit momentarily. To conclude, can I have the last slide? Despite the well-meaning intentions of the Bishop of San Leone Spirito to lift the spirits of the papal court, events in Italy were becoming far gloomier by the day. Less than 2 months after Spirito had delivered his moral-boosting oration, Spanish, German and Italian troops under the banner of the Holy Roman Emperor arrived before the walls of Rome. At daybreak on the 6th of May, these soldiers breached the city walls behind the Vatican and swarmed in. By sunset the same day, almost the entire city was at their mercy. Of the 189 Swiss guards on duty, all but 42 were massacred by imperial troops on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. Their bravery, however, ensured that Pope Clement VII could escape to the safety of Castle St. Angelo, where he looked on helplessly as the city was brutally sacked and pillaged. Although Clement finally surrendered on the 5th of June and agreed to pay a ransom of 400,000 ducats, he remained in the papal fortress for 6 more months under direct imperial guard. On the 7th of December, he was finally allowed to escape to Orvieto, and he did not return to Rome until the following autumn. The mutinous troops, however, continued to occupy the defenceless capital until February, when they were finally dispersed by plague. As Professor Kenneth Gowans has pointed out, and I quote, "The sack of Rome resulted most immediately from the Pope's indecision and his decision the previous year to break an alliance with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V in favour of joining the pro-French League of Cognac, an act of disloyalty that had spurred the Emperor to send Bourbon and his men towards Rome. The event served as the coup de grace for Clement VII's foreign policy, which had taken as its chief aim preventing either Spain or France from gaining dominance over the Italian peninsula. And the situation was not to change for many years. Thank you.